Hi, welcome back. So now you have spent 2 minutes looking at an object, and then you have written something about it. Now, you're going to come out of classes like this with this writing, and you're not exactly sure what to do with it. So I feel like it's really good uh, during these prompts to just brainstorm and let your mind go as far as possible. But then later, come back to what you've written. And I feel like a good thing to do is if you have like a page full of just writing, like how do you process that? It's not really easy, right? So, what I would suggest you do later on tonight at home, whenever, at a coffee shop, somewhere else, um, go through and just underline your favorite stuff, the gold. Think of it as the gold, think of it as the glimmer. Underline the best stuff and then drag that stuff into the next page and make that a poem. So take only the gold, not any of the filler words, not any of the thinking, but just only the gold, and then create a new form for that. And then keep doing that over and over, taking the gold, moving it into a new form. It's like a snake shedding its skin. Okay, continuing this idea of the underglimmer. So now you're getting used to looking at something and wondering what comes up. It's almost like being surprised by your own brain. You're staring at the coffee cup, and then what happens. So let's go to this first page. Has got some wonderful quotations. Um, I really like Anne Carson. She's a Canadian poet and a classics scholar who teaches at the University of Toronto and NYU. So she has these short talks. So in this one, this is basically Leonardo da Vinci, who was the famous painter from Italy in the Renaissance. So she imagines him looking at the Mona Lisa, the famous painting, right? So it's the painter, it's the artist, and then the object, who is the woman sitting for this painting. And she imagines this as a pouring back and forth. So every day, so this is the he is Leonardo da Vinci. Every day he poured his question into her, as you pour water from one vessel into another, and it poured back. Don't tell me he was painting his mother, lust, etc. There is a moment when the water is not in one vessel, nor in the other. What a thirst it was, and he supposed that when the canvas became completely empty, he would stop. But women are strong. She knew vessels. She knew water. She knew mortal thirst. So that is basically the idea that, we think that we are the ones who are doing all of the volition as artists. It's all coming from us. But actually, you realize if you make some art, that the power doesn't feel like it's always inside of you. The power is kind of outside of you, and you can borrow the power from the world. So, if you're looking at this cup, you're making art about this cup or whatever your object is, you're trying to write a poem about it, that there is a kind of a back and forth that goes on, or it feels like it's going on. It's not all you doing the work and projecting your ego onto everything. If it's just you telling everything what to do, like some kind of maniacal film director, then definitely you're going to get the sense of, that Basho says, of a subjective forgery. So I'll just read real quick Toni Morrison's quote as well on the same page below Anne Carson. I'm just trying to look at something without blinking, which I also love. Just trying to sustain our gaze. So let me just say a little bit more theory about this idea of the underglimmer, or at least what I feel like might happen as we're looking at things. So I feel like the real work of poetry is to look at the world and sustaining our gaze. We're all so busy these days with all of our tasks, with our phones and our bias, that we don't ever want to look just at the thing. It feels like it'll slow us down if we look at something too closely. We've got to rush on to the next thing. Our bodies are saying, go, 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 or we'll be late, But sometimes a sustained gaze can happen by accident. While we're in traffic, while we're daydreaming on a bus, or when we're having a smoke, if you smoke. But if we want to make art consistently, we have to be able to recognize this mindset and actually calm our minds down whenever possible. Make a conscientious effort to sustain our gaze on the objects around us. Or at least maybe in the evening, when you have more time, just to remind yourself to calm down a little bit. Meditate, or listen to some music, turn down the lights, or go for a walk, and make space for this part of your brain, which I feel like my brain at least craves this calmer reverie, and not just the rushing through the world. I think what happens, which becomes very interesting, is that when we make the art, we realize that everything that's inside us and everything that we are brings us to this moment of looking. You know, if I had a bad day, then my bad day is projected onto the thing that I'm looking at. You know, if in the morning I got an angry email from somebody, then that angry email is in the process of me looking at this cup. So in a way, you can think of the cup or the object as reading us or looking at us and having a conversation with us. So think of the Ann Carson as there's an exchange back and forth. The cup asks me, "How was your morning?" You know, and I say, "Well, I had an angry email this morning. I'm not in a great mood." You know, or I had a beautiful morning. It was a very calm morning. So this is, I feel like, what happens with art. The objects around us, there's a kind of mirroring that goes on, a back and forth. So, and we can extend this sense of seeing. It's not just with the eyes, but it's with our hearts and our feelings and our memories and our ears and basically also our dreams. And it brings up this question of what would the objects around us look like if we could become a lot more open? You know, because if I'm stressed out, I see this object as its utilitarian value. It's carrying coffee to my lips, you know. But then if I were open and calm and breathing and not stressed out and not worried, all of a sudden I can see that this object is something very beautiful and it's part of the room, you know. So William Blake, who's a wonderful romantic poet, talked about this. I don't know if you know the Doors, the band the Doors from the 1960s. Jim Morrison was a lover of William Blake and got this idea of the Doors from a quotation of his. And the quotation is quite famous. It's, "If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. For man has closed himself up till he sees all things through narrow chinks of his cavern." So this is William Blake. So these narrow chinks of our cavern would be the stressed out version of ourselves. But if we cleansed the doors of perception, this is what I'm talking about. The ability to calm our minds and just stay in that reverie place, in that calm place. And then what do the objects around us feel like? So go quickly to the bottom of the page, the first page. There's a David Foster Wallace quote, which I think is central to what we're talking about. "But if you've really learned how to think," he says, "how to pay attention, it will actually be within your power to experience a crowded, hot, slow, consumer hell type situation as not only meaningful, but sacred, on fire with the same force that lit the stars. Compassion, love, the subsurface unity of all things." So this just paints a picture, which I recognize, and maybe some of you do too, of being extremely busy and having people all around. And then there's a moment, and you don't know where it comes from, but it's a moment of calm and quiet, where all of a sudden you have a kind of poetic vision. Now, let me say, the more you practice this, the easier it becomes. The more you can recognize that nighttime way of looking at things, the more it happens. It just seems to magically happen. So, but the idea is practice. You have to keep going back to this place of non-stressed reverie. Okay, let me give you another example or two, which I really enjoy, of a kind of looking. So let's go to the Alice Oswald poem, which is on page 2. She's a British poet and still alive, who lives in the country with her husband and kids. Um, and I say that because it seems to pertain to the content of this poem, which is kind of rural. So this one is called Fox. It's quite different from the Tracy K. Smith poem, but try to think of it as a type of looking. Fox. I heard a cough, as if a thief was there, outside my sleep, a sharp intake of air. A fox in her fox fur, stepping across the grass in her black gloves, barked at my house. Just so abrupt and odd, the way she went hungrily asking, in the heart's thick accent, in such serious, sleepless trespass she came, a woman with a man's voice, but no name, as if to say, it's midnight and my life is laid beneath my children like gold leaf. So in this case, we have a speaker who may have something to do with Alice Oswald, who it seems like at the beginning is in bed, possibly. She hears a cough, and as if a thief were there, and I picture her sitting up in the dark. So there's this feeling, of a kind of scare. You're half awake, and you just kind of like wake up, and something has happened. You're not really well situated. Now, so this is, you can think of this as a kind of a liminal state, not quite awake, not quite asleep, or a hypnagogic state is another way of describing it. And so what she sees in this case is more like an imagination. She hears a bark, and then she imagines a fox, it seems like. But it could be a dog, it could be a coyote, it could be a wolf, or it could just be a sound. Maybe the house makes sound sometimes at night. Maybe something fell. So it's not quite sure. It's almost like an auditory hallucination of some kind. But where her mind goes is very interesting. So what she sees in her mind's eye is this fox. And she starts to, it seems to me like, imagine the fox as a woman with a man's voice, but no name, kind of mythic, abrupt and odd and mythic. In the grass, a fox in her fox fur, in her black gloves. So she's imagining almost a kind of weird mythic creature. And then at the end seems to imagine about the motherhood of the creature. So it's a female fox. And the last lines, it's midnight and my life is laid beneath my children like gold leaf. So it's like and I imagine she's thinking of herself and motherhood. She has this vision of her own life is like this golden passage where her children walk. It's like creating this golden path for her own children. So in this case, if we think of it like the Basho poem, is she letting the fox be what it is, or is she projecting something onto the fox? Well, in this case, it's quite obvious, I think, that she's projecting something. But what she projects is not really ego-driven, is it? It doesn't feel like a subjective forgery. She takes us somewhere very fascinating, I think. Okay, so just think of this as an alternate way of looking. The Tracy K. Smith was directly looking at her own daughter and then wondering about herself. In this case, the Fox poem, it's an auditory, it's a hearing, and then some kind of a projection. But the projection, I think, is fascinating, right? Okay, so to bring us back to this idea of the Underglimmer, I want to just say I feel like there's a type of looking, like when you look at something. I'm looking at the cup. I feel like there are different states that our mind passes through. I don't think we're just one person. I'm not just one John looking at things. But I feel like I'm different Johns at different times of the day. Like Alice Oswald, I have a sleepy John, a hypnagogic John as I'm falling asleep. That's one John. There's John in traffic. There's John the teacher. There's John the husband. There's John the Canadian. There's John the American. We have different different kinds of lenses that we look through the world with. So I feel like these are, sometimes we pass through one lens into another. So what I'm saying is the basic ones here are the daytime vision of things, which is just like, this is a cup to carry coffee. And changing from that to this as a kind of visionary object that passes back and forth between us. So I feel like as we're looking, we can think of the mind as passing through gates. You know, like you pass through a gate to get to a house. You pass through another, the door is a kind of a gate. Think of these as portals, but I'm going to call them gates. So when you pass through one, your mindset just changes ever so slightly, right? So we all know what this is like, to change from one mood to another. You know, you're outside on your way to a cinema and you're kind of stressed out, and then you enter the cinema and you sit in the dark and your mind enters another state. You know, it's a kind of a passing through a gate. So I feel like the different gates that are passed through as we're looking at an object. Now, this is true for me, but perhaps not true for anybody else. So one thing is, as I'm looking at the cup, one thing that happens is the name disappears. The word cup doesn't really mean anything. That's the utilitarian idea of what this is. Cup, you know? But when I start to look, that doesn't matter anymore. So the first gate that I think I pass through is where the name disappears. So that's an important one, I think. And maybe you can notice as you're looking, the name kind of fall away. The next gate I think that's passed through for me is desire. So I don't want anything from the cup anymore. I'm just looking. I'm just staring, you know? So I feel like we live in consumerist societies where we're told that our value is how much money we can spend and how much we can purchase. We're given a lot of advertisements, and this is all the language of acquisition. So like, you know, what can we gain from the things around us? But this is the utilitarian mind, the daytime mind. I feel like the poetic mind that we're entering, the reverie, doesn't have to do with buying things or even desire. So desire can fall away. And I think this is a very nice moment, I think. So we're looking at the cup, and I don't want anything from the cup anymore. So the name is gone, and any desire is gone. I can just look now. And then I would say the next gate is what I would call, as a kind of shorthand, silence. Silence. So just a kind of quiet. And this, for me, is, I don't know what it means to you, but to me it means where I get into a more meditative mindset. Just very quiet, and I can just look at things. And I start to see the interconnectedness of things. It's a meditative mindset, calm. And this is, to me, is a poetic reverie mindset as well. So I kind of deeper silence. And I'm sure that all of you recognize this to some degree. And I'm sure you have different words to describe it and different connotations of it than I do. But so again, just to repeat, this process of looking might possibly involve just at first just looking, and maybe it's, you know, normal daytime. This is my coffee cup, it's got coffee in it. And then if you sustain that gaze, you pass through numerous gates in order to release the daytime mind and enter the nighttime mind. So one of the gates is the name falls away, another is desire falls away, and the third is silence. And I feel like if you can recognize that that's happening, it can happen very fast in a different order, then that's entering the kind of poetic mind frame. Okay, so I'd like to go through Joyce's quotation from the first page from Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. So this is a very famous example of literature. So James Joyce was the Irish poet. This was his first large novel, and Ulysses came after this. So Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. The idea with this is Stephen Dedalus is the main character, and he is walking along the beach in Dublin, and he feels very guilty about his attraction to women, and he's a Catholic, In the scene before this, he's been in church and he feels a lot of guilt and he feels like he's going to hell because of his thoughts about women. So in this quotation, you'll notice what he sees is a woman coming out of the water. And rather than projecting his own lust and his own ideas onto her, he has a vision of her, which is a kind of mythic vision. And he starts to see all of the, everything kind of interconnected. So in a way, this quotation is enacting the process that I'm talking about, where usually in our daytime brain we want something from the things around us. But in this case, notice how the woman is not something that he wants anything from. It's not lust anymore, but he starts to see her as an artist sees her, the kind of the underglimmer underneath the surface. And in fact, that's the name of the book, Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. It's all about him becoming an artist. So let me just read this quote. A girl stood before him in midstream, alone and still, gazing out to sea. She seemed like one whom magic had changed into the likeness of a strange and beautiful sea-bird. He turned away from her suddenly and set off across the strand. His cheeks were aflame, his body was aglow, his limbs were trembling. Her eyes had called him, and his soul had leapt at the call, to live, to err, to fall, to triumph. A wild anger had appeared to him, to throw open the gates of all the ways of error and glory. He felt above him the vast, indifferent dome and the calm processes of the heavenly bodies, and the earth beneath him, the earth that had borne him, had taken him to her breast. He closed his eyes in the languor of sleep. His eyelids trembled as if they felt the vast cyclic movement of the earth, and her watchers trembled as if they felt the strange light of some new world. His soul was swooning into some new world, fantastic, dim, uncertain as under sea, traversed by cloudy shapes and beings, a world, a glimmer, or a flower. So I like that quote because it just touches on everything that we're doing in this workshop. He sees this glimmering and this vast interconnectedness in this moment, which does feel like a back and forth between the subject and the speaker. Okay, I'd like to give you another prompt now. So in this case, I would like you to do another. I would like to encourage you to kind of get into the process of enjoying looking. Like looking can be very enjoyable, very, very sweet. So I'd like you to just take an object, just a normal object, and put it in front of the person next to you so that everybody gets an object. It could be a pen, it could be a water bottle, it could be a pencil sharpener. It doesn't have to be something really strange. But just take something that will be a slight surprise to the person next to you and make sure everybody gets one. And I would like you to do the same exercise as you did earlier. So look at it for 2 minutes and then afterwards write about it. Okay? And then I'll come back after that.